Rumbee's podcast. Rumbee's podcast. Yeah. Rumbee's podcast. What? Rumbee's podcast. Rumbee's podcast. This is Rumbee's podcast. What? Rumbee's podcast. Yeah. Rumbee's podcast. Oh yeah. I tell you that other one time was the time. You got it already.
Hello, welcome to Room B. I'm your host, Rumbii. You guys, I'm depressed. I am depressed. Surprise, surprise, right? Like, literally a couple of weeks ago, I was sleep deprived, and I spoke in last week's episode about how sleep deprivation and our mental health are linked, and I'm aware of that. It's just every time I get depressed, I'm always so surprised. I don't think it's something that you get used to. And here I am. I'm also hair depressed, which, if you don't know what that is, it's when your hair just is not hairing. It's not doing what it's supposed to. And you know that it takes so much energy and time to get it to what you want it to be. And you just don't have that in you. So you end up with bad hair and it just makes you feel worse. That's why I'm wearing this giant beanie. Yes, I'm going to address the giant beanie in the room. I love this beanie. My mom made it for me because I had moved here to Ottawa and I couldn't find any beanies that would like fit my natural hair. So she sent me this and it's perfect. And I kind of like it because like it looks a little bit silly, you know, like it looks weird. It kind of makes you want to keep staring at it. Like, why is that hat so big? But I get all my hair in it, which is great. So thanks, Mom. And I can actually get a bonnet underneath there. So I've actually got a bonnet under here. So I love it. And it's warm. And it's very fitting that the day that I wake up depressed, we have a snowstorm. There is snow everywhere out there. It's annoying. You know, I celebrated like 3 days ago. I literally celebrated. I was like, yes, we go through another winter. It's over. It's behind us now. It's back. So being depressed right now is something that's a little bit scary for me because it was kind of something that I dreaded. I kind of was avoiding the idea of me being depressed because, as I've said before, I'm trying to be a content girly, you know? I'm trying to create content, and you need discipline. You need to have a schedule. You need to like stay on top of things, always be in your creator mindset, you know? And so the reason why I was completely ignoring it is because I didn't want to admit that my depression definitely sucks the creativity out of me. What I've done in the past, like since starting my YouTube channel in 2020, I would always create content when I was happier, when I was happiest, when I was having fun. I would like create so much content, post it. But the moment I got depressed, I would just like disappear. I'll stop posting, I'll stop making anything, and I'll just go with the motions. But that happens way too often. I can't just let the depression win every single time, you know? If you want to gain success in this content creation thing, you gotta be consistent. You gotta put in the work, you gotta put in the hours. It doesn't just come to you just like that. You gotta work for it. So that's why I'm kind of torn, because on one hand, I'm like, damn, I'm sad. I don't wanna do this. I just want to do what I usually do, which is to just stop, focus on my mental health, and then come back when I'm feeling better. But that's not the case this time around. This year, as you know, I'm making a bit of an effort, you know, trying to be consistent, just to prove to myself that I can do it. It's just a goal of mine. And of course, like, who doesn't want to gain success in what they do? But more importantly, it's more just like setting a goal for myself, achieving it, and like reminding myself that I'm her, you know, like I'm that girl. Like if you want to do something, you set your mind to it and you do it. which is what I've always done. Like, and whenever I do things like that, it always makes me feel so accomplished. It makes me feel proud of myself, and it makes me feel confident in who I am. And those are some of the things that I had been missing over the last few years. And so setting myself this challenge is more about just self-love, really. So now that I'm here, I'm depressed and content still needs to be made. I'm a little bit nervous. Because I'm at that crossroads, right? Where you're like, on one hand, you can continue what you're doing and you gain momentum, and it's a positive experience. It reinforces you to continue what you're doing, and you gain pride from it, which is what I want to focus on. But on the other hand, the second option is to just completely stop altogether and default to what you're used to, which is accepting defeat and just letting the depression win. So I know what I'm leaning towards. Oh, it's a very easy answer. But the reality is the temptation is still there to just like give up. So here I am. Recording an episode, even though I'm depressed and I'd rather be in bed. I thought I would talk to you about something that popped into my mind, because all this thinking about my depression made me realize that it's been exactly 10 years since my initial diagnosis. And I wanted to share with you something that I want to call therapy tales, because gosh, there's there are tales to be told about therapy. And the goal really would be to share my experiences in hopes that if you're considering going to therapy, you kind of see the reality of what actually happens. Because it's all well and good choosing to go and get therapy, but being completely unaware of some of the hurdles you might come across and some things that might even make your mental health a little bit worse. It's a shock to the system. Like when I went through it, it was a tough time. It was a very scary time in my life for me. I was confused, scared. Back then, there was so much stigma, so much stigma, and it was embarrassing, and it was not a good time. It was not a good time. I hope that I'm able to offer some valuable insight into the goings-ons of that process of seeking out help, because if I can make the process a little bit easier for you to go through and make it easier for you to not feel as though you're alone and answer some of the questions that you might have, then I am going to gladly share what I know with you. And, a lot of people always talk about the good stuff. If you want to know about the great things about therapy, then this episode is not for you. I'm just going to be real with you. I'm going to tell you the scary things, the confusing things, the shocking things that I went through while trying to get support with my mental health. And the goal here isn't to discourage you to get help. In fact, it's actually to offer you a realistic expectation so that if this happens to you, I'm not saying it will, you might have a great experience. You might have a better experience. All healthcare systems are different. So I just want to acknowledge that too. But in the off chance that we go through similar situations, I'm here for you. A lot of the stuff that I'm going to discuss are mostly about yourself and not necessarily the system. I can't speak for systems because, again, systems are different everywhere. But it's more of like things that you might go through that might make the process a little bit more difficult. And I want to classify them, I guess, as burdens instead of like negatives, I guess, because it's more based off of your thinking and decision making at that time. Because again, like I said, you're confused, you're lost. So we're not really thinking properly. We're not at our best, really. So I hope that this can be helpful to allow you to offer yourself a little bit of grace, especially in that moment of desperation. Because a lot of times when we go to therapy or seek out mental health support, we are desperate. We need the help urgently, and we can be very drastic in our decision making and choices. So just want to acknowledge that, because not many people talk about that, you know? No one always talks about the great things, why you should do therapy and how it's going to benefit you. But I want to be realistic and tell you about the downsides sometimes. So these burdens, the first one I want to focus on is just like how you are like around authoritative figures. So if you find, let's say myself, I'll use myself as an example. I struggle with people in authoritative figures. I am very nervous around them. I feel like I need to respect them. I feel like sometimes I perform in front of them. I do what I think that they want me to do. You know, I end up not being myself. And as a result, that affected my relationship with my therapist, because at the time I didn't know what kind of relationship to have with a therapist. Up until then, every single other health professional that I dealt with, when you sort of meet them, you understand that you are the hierarchy, you're the professional, you know the information, you are teaching me right now, right? But with a therapist, as much as you have that aspect of the relationship with your therapist, there's also other aspects, like you need to be comfortable around your therapist, and you need to also have a sense of camaraderie. Is that the word that I'm trying to go for? No, I think you need to have good rapport. You need to be comfortable with the person that you're going to be spending an hour a week with. So it's important that you check how you react to an authoritative figure. So with that knowledge, I naturally just was not comfortable at all when I initially went to therapy, because I was constantly thinking about the relationship between her and myself, and completely unaware of the fact that that's actually changing the type of care that I'm getting. Because if I'm not comfortable around her, I'm not going to share as much with her. And I didn't. And in the end, it didn't last. I didn't find it useful. I didn't find it helpful. And all it did was put me in another worse situation, because my needs hadn't been met and I'd gone so long without the appropriate care that I needed. She's thinking she's doing what I need, but I wasn't fully giving into the process. And the reason why it's important that you check this is because it helps you understand that you are in a space to share your deepest, darkest secrets, right? Like you need to be completely comfortable. And so the relationship you have has to be a little bit, I guess, like a friend, not to be completely a friend. Your therapist should not be a friend. I mean, in the sense that the level of comfort that you are able to share your deepest, darkest secrets, or I wouldn't call them secrets, but your traumas, your worries, your fears, all those kind of things. So I'd advise that you think about how you behave around that. Because for me at the time, that was my first ever interaction with a healthcare professional who I had to be like chummy with, you know, because it's a lot we discuss. So up until then, like when you see a doctor, a physiotherapist, and this and that, you understand that they're there to tell you what to do and you just follow what they do. But in order for you to actually access that ability to share the things that matter, the things that will actually help with your mental health, you need to be a little bit more comfortable, around them. Another thing I want to point out, which I did, which I wish, oh my God, I wish 10 years ago I would have never focused any of my energy on this, because all it did was just make things so much worse. I was afraid of the stigma of being diagnosed with depression, the stigma of how people treat you, how people look at you, what people think about you. And I gave into that fear, and I have to be honest, it made my mental health much worse for like a year. So I recommend that you don't. I know nowadays it's much nicer. People are more accepting. People are learning. People are sharing more. Mental health is a very big topic that people are constantly talking about. I mean, even I'm throwing my hat in the ring, you know? So nowadays things are different. But 10 years ago, people were not very welcoming. And for the most part, I built it up in my head. I focused way too much about what I thought my family was going to think, my friends were going to think, the people around me, my work. I was just scared. I thought if I told them I was depressed, they wouldn't like me, they wouldn't want to hire me. So I just kept that to myself. I was living with my mom and I never told her that I was diagnosed. And it was all bad. It was all bad because it culminated with me literally losing contact with my family. Like I went a very long time without speaking to my family and it was a dark time. I was worried, I was confused, I was scared, I was suicidal. It was a rough time. It was a really, really rough time. And every time I look back at that time, the only thing that I see is just a scared little girl. Really, that's all it was. I was just so scared, so confused, worried all the time. And like I said, you know, I am someone who likes to perform to people who I perceive to be in a more authoritative position than me. So because of that, I just made things worse for myself. I made myself feel more lonely. I isolated myself. I added so much worry that didn't need to be there and keeping it from everyone. You know, I was withholding my side effects from my medication. I didn't talk about going to therapy. I didn't talk about what I was feeling, being suicidal. It's it's just so sad. It's so, so sad. So if you can avoid focusing on stigma, do it because it's like the broad umbrella that covers so many things, you know, not being able to share what I'm going through, not talking about my diagnosis, not talking about the medication I was taking, not talking about my side effects, not talking about the time I need to schedule therapy on a weekly basis, not talking about my feelings, not talking about the fact that I was suicidal. Like it was a lot. All of that falls under stigma because it just don't focus on it. Honestly, don't focus on it. The fact that you got a diagnosis means that you can actually go to your family and educate them on the information that you've been given. So when you get that diagnosis, instead of spiraling like I did, I spiraled. It also like was probably because I immediately was given antidepressants that very day. So maybe I was also experiencing the side effects. But I spiraled the day I was diagnosed. Don't accept it. And if anything, you should be glad you got diagnosed because at least it gives you something to work on. You're better off than you were not knowing. So it's a good thing. So don't focus on the stigma. Don't. Not in this day and age. And it's not going to help you at all. If anything, it's probably going to create more problems because it did for me. The final thing I want to touch on is the relationship between having a therapist who has nothing in common with you and your treatment. I had a white male 50-something-year-old therapist once, and our sessions, the deadest sessions ever. Like it just, some things he just didn't understand. He had no reference point. He had no cultural understanding. He had no historical understanding. It was just, it wasn't working. And at that time, I'd have to book sessions in like bulk. So I had booked like 6 sessions and already paid for them. And I had to spend 6 weeks talking to this dude who didn't get it. He didn't get it at all. So if you can, find a therapist that's closest related to you. Think about your culture, think about your race, think about your interests, your education. think about all those things and find a therapist that closely resembles those things, because that way, when it comes to, again, that comfort of being like confident enough to share these moments that you go through, or these experiences that you've had, you need your therapist to have some frame of understanding considering the situation. My therapist sessions went to a completely different level when I finally chose a Black female therapist who was a year older than me. I understand when you're younger, it's harder to find a 20-year-old, 21-year-old therapist. But if you can, make sure they tick other boxes. So if you're Black, find a Black therapist. That alone will change the game. If you are disabled, find a therapist with a similar disability. Even something as simple as hair type. I'm not even kidding you. When I have hair depression, I can tell my therapist and she gets it because she's been there. So all those things matter, because at the end of the day, the goal here is to make sure that you get the treatment that you deserve. So those are just some things that I want to leave with you to think about. Everyone needs a therapist. Doesn't matter if you have a diagnosis or not. I think everybody should get a therapist. Just the same way that we all have family doctors, physiotherapists, all that stuff. Get a therapist. You need one. It's very important, because even if you don't have a diagnosis, there is so much information that they can offer you in order to understand certain things. Sometimes you need an uninvolved party to give you their insight and solutions. Sometimes you also just need an uninvolved person to just listen. We all need that. So good luck. Enjoy. I hope that it's beneficial to you. Therapy has been very, very beneficial to me. I am at this point in my mental health journey because of therapy. If I had never gone to therapy, sometimes I think I might not even be here, because things were dire. Things were bad. But therapy taught me so many skills to get me out of those horrible moments. And that's why right now I'm able to come on here and talk to you guys about what I'm going through, the fact that I'm depressed right now, because I've got those skills, those skill sets. Dude, 10 years ago, you know what? Not even 10 years ago, 5 years ago, you wouldn't get me to just openly talk about this on the internet. Maybe with someone, one-to-one, a stranger. Oh, I love doing that. Gosh, that's so embarrassing sometimes. You know, when you just get a little bit too chatty around a stranger, and then you start seeing their eyes glaze over and you're like, oh. No, can't relate, just me. Sometimes I talk a little bit too much. Okay, that's why I got a podcast, because I like doing this. So anyway, I just want to finish with a couple quotes, and these are from some psychologists. And I hope that you can keep these two quotes in mind when you are considering therapy, or just considering focusing on mental health care. So the first one is from Noam Spencer, and he's a professor of psychology at Otterbein University. I don't know where that is. And a practicing clinical psychologist in Columbus, Ohio. He says, clinician competence and mastery vary. Not surprisingly, some therapists respond better to challenging patient presentations than others. That's the first quote. Second quote is from David Moore, who is also a clinical psychologist. He writes, on the part of the therapist, lack of empathy, underestimation of severity of the patient's problems, negative countertransference, poor technique, high concentrations of transference interpretations, and disagreement with the patient about the therapy process all have been associated with negative outcome. I bring these two quotes up because I hope that you realize that there are so many complex factors that contribute to you having the appropriate care. So keep that in mind and take the time that you need to find the appropriate person to share these things with. it's important that you feel seen, heard, understood. And when you're sharing traumatic experiences, hard times, good times, all those moments, you need to be completely comfortable and know that when there are things that have some nuances in there, the person you're speaking to gets it because they have the experience, they have the cultural background. And with that said, I hope that you stay awesome, be kind, and spread positivity. Rumbee's podcast. Rumbee's podcast. Yeah. Rumbee's podcast. What? Rumbee's podcast. Rumbee's podcast. This is Rumbee's podcast. What? Rumbee's podcast. Yeah. Rumbee's podcast. Oh yeah. I tell you that little one time was the time.